Please welcome to the stage the Smithsonian's Under-Secretary for Education, Dr. Monique Chisholm, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, Elizabeth Macmillan Director, Dr. Anthea Hartig, the Smithsonian's American Women's History Museum Director, Dr. Elizabeth Babcock, the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Latino Director, Mr. Jorge Zamanillo, and the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture's Acting Director, Ms. Shanita Brackett.
Welcome back, everyone. How are you doing? Good. It's good to see so many people return, and for those of you who might be just joining us, welcome. We've been having a great summit, lots of exciting opportunities for conversation and dialogue and exchange. And I am really excited about this last panel because I get to talk with my colleagues and get kind of nerdy about stuff that we don't get to talk about a lot. So I think it's going to be a great session. I am really excited I want to just tell you a little bit about each one of them because they're such dynamic people and what they bring to the table. So let me take a minute just to introduce each one of them. I'm going to start off with Dr. Babcock. Elizabeth Babcock is our founding director of the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. And she brings a great deal of experience in public engagement and also education strategies. She has extensive experience previously, before she came to the Smithsonian in California, working at Forever Balboa Park.
Yep.
And yeah.
San Diego is in the house.
And she's also very connected to cultural and scientific institutions, and so she brings a wealth of experience and expertise. We're also very happy to have Jorge, and help me with your last name.
Zamanillo.
Zamanillo.
You have to say it like that.
Yeah, Zamanillo. Right? It's been a pleasure to get to work with Jorge and get to know him also. He's the founding director of the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Latino, which was established by Congress in December 2020. And the purpose really is to illuminate the story of the United States by featuring Latinos and their contributions to the nation's art, history, and culture. Before joining us, he had leadership roles as the executive director and CEO of History Miami, and also served as an archaeologist at the Historical Conservatory. Right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, got it.
Yes. He was looking like he wasn't quite sure if that was the right description. Also a pleasure to have a colleague in Dr. Anthea Hartig, who is the director, the Elizabeth Macmillan Director at the National Museum of American History. And I'm proud to say, but also saddened to say, that she's the first female to serve in that capacity. So happy that we actually have somebody serving in that capacity as a woman. Sad that it took us so long to get the first one. But she is an award-winning public historian. She specializes also in cultural heritage, and she is dedicated to making sure that the nation's rich, diverse history is both accessible and relevant and tells multiple and complex stories. And also very happy to be joined by our colleague, Ms. Shanita Brackett, who is serving as the acting director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Yep.
And she is a strong champion for transformative visitor experiences through education, engagement, and also cultural understanding. She has nearly 2 decades of public service, and she's focused in on science, communications, and also program leadership. She's had an opportunity to really help the Smithsonian in different capacities. She served as the interim director for a little while at Anacostia Community Museum, and her expertise has been helping to transform many aspects of the pan-institutional community. So please join me once again in welcoming them. So we have a lot to cover, and I'm going to just, as a, I don't know if any of you know this or not, but I'm a former teacher. I don't know if you can ever be a former. I'm a teacher. And so I feel like it's always good protocol to make sure that we catch up everybody, get everybody on the same page, and then we jump into the conversation. So I'm just going to start with just a little bit of setting the stage, and then we're going to jump into a deeper contextual conversation. But just as a reminder, this conversation is focused on the Declaration of Independence. And one of the things that I was saying to Jorge backstage is that in preparation for these conversations this week, I had a chance to kind of geek out and nerd out a little bit about the Declaration of Independence. And it's funny because as we were remembering with Carlotta's story, it's not just a point in time. It's not like July 4th, they signed it and everything was done. And it actually wasn't finished being signed on July 4th. It was, it took a couple of weeks after that. So, but there's a whole kind of movement that led into the context of the Declaration of Independence. And I was saying to Jorge that I think it's a really amazing story. I mean, it's complex, and there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about that make it complex. But at its core, when you think about it, there's a group that comes together to say, hey, we've started to experience a little bit of what it means to be independent and have some self-independence, and we really want to continue in that vein. And the king comes back and says, no, you can't. You are forbidden, and takes away those opportunities. And individually, up to this point, the states have been petitioning and trying to get their concerns heard. But they thought maybe if we come together as a collective voice, we would be heard in a more compelling way. So the Continental Congress starts, and they're really not trying to revolt. They're just really trying to get their grievances heard and understood. And then there comes the tipping point. They were really upset because there wasn't any Earl Grey tea. I would be also. So this Boston Tea Party happened, and that really upset the whole apple cart, right? And so there really was this shift that happened in terms of really starting to think about what it meant to be independent. And I think one of the things that I learned in my refresh of this is that one of the things that helped to propel that was actually that the states drafted their own constitutions first. So before they even got to the Continental Congress to sign to adopt the Declaration of Independence, states had started to have a vision for themselves about what the Constitution was. So when we come into the Second Continental Congress, there's all kinds of things that are going on. They're not in agreement. There's a lot of persuasion that has to happen. John Adams is working really hard in the bars trying to get people to come over, right, to the side of light. And it's when you stop and think about it, it really is magnificent to think that this started our nation in so many different ways. And so Anthea's going to talk through us a little bit more of the context, some of the framing ideas and ideals, a little bit more about what was going on. But I just wanted to kind of provide that entryway into the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Monique. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you, fellow educators, with my brother and sister directors, and there's also some in the audience. And then I guess thousands of you online. Warmest welcomes from incredibly steamy, thunderstorm-ridden swamplands. We're here on the ancestral homelands of the Piscataway people. This is a very rich and complicated landscape, and today we get to add a new layer to that complexity. So what a humbling joy that is. So, taking us back to the 1770s and the 1760s, the Great Britain's kind of coming together under Queen Anne in 1704 launches this really intense kind of catch-up game of imperial expansion. The Spanish, of course, had been at it much longer, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and I think we have someone here from Amsterdam. God love you, for coming all the way in. It's wonderful to have you here. So in this very complicated kind of colonial expansionist mentality of both settling, populating, often converting, and extraction, you have, of course, the fringe of the eastern seaboard here on the North American continent that has been already gone, had the century and a half of European conquest and exploration. So the foundational ideals of the Enlightenment, as they're kind of spun through like this really complicated sieve, if you will. If you like to cook, like think of like you're sifting all of this stuff into the batter of the cookies that will become the Declaration of Independence. They're the core foundational ideals, and I'll get into some of them. But you can see the Declaration as an incredibly beautifully written preamble, kind of a divorce document. You can see it a number of ways, and I think as teachers, we can get our students kind of thinking about, like, how do you separate? What is that kind of formal process?
If you're mad at somebody, you should at least tell them why you're mad.
And
right?
boy, we got grievances.
Yeah. We got grievances.
We got grievances, and we're going to
Yeah.
list them all out for you. If we have time, I'll tell you about when I saw King George III's response at Royal Windsor Archives a couple months ago. See, of course, he had his own ideas about what all this meant.
Yeah.
But really picking up on the kind of the privilege of identification of one's own humanity and one's own soul, the Declaration really, obviously centers us in liberty, in equality, in the right to self-govern, both thyself and thy new nation. And of course, the famous line of all men are created equal really has become a touchstone. And now in the 249th year, right, what does that mean? I think all of us love to see the Declaration as very much a living document. Starting really in, I'll show you a copy of it, starting in like the 1810s. It was already kind of revered. It was like, how do we make sure that this is part of our national narrative as they're still basically battling the British? Think about the War of 1812. It took place right here. The White House was burned. The simultaneous recordation of what the Declaration meant and was starting to mean to a new nation is pretty much on display. But it's kept alive because abolitionists, women, civil rights leaders, Native American leaders, immigrants throughout time have used the Declaration to push it, right, to expand the bubble of who's included and who's excluded. I think that then by doing that, they kind of expanded who is included in American polity, right, who's included in the American narrative. And today, I think I see a lot of our capacity to both reflect, but then to embrace the responsibilities inherent in the Declaration. We have to, I think, we have a great opportunity this year and next year, and I hope every year, to understand the limitations of the Declaration, but also then to understand its power and those kind of coexistence of contradictions, paradoxes, tensions, and we're going to get into some of those on this panel. The coexistence, right, the capacity for the signers of that Declaration to hold multiple truths at once, right, to hold slavery in paradox with freedom, to hold disenfranchisement alongside expansion of franchisement, to hold lofty ideals of equality while consciously choosing inequality for others. So this kind of constant set of contradictions, I think, is really so critical to the broader set of American stories that I think are all coming, of course, right now, right? Do we have the liberty to hold ourselves up to those highest ideals, to paraphrase Secretary Bunch, I know who you heard from today. So those are some of my thoughts. Don't ask a historian what time it is, because you know the history of the clock.
Yeah.
It's a long one.
Probably took a lot of time.
She's going to, in her next life, I'm telling you, stand up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm here all night.
I'll hear all week.
So thank you so much for that beautiful capturing of the context and some of the framing ideas. Let's talk a little bit about who it was written for. Was it written for the king?
Well, that's a great question. The first reading of it, they put on horseback. They made copies at a local printer named Dunlap in Philadelphia. They took copies. They had Washington read it to its men, because remember, the army came first. There was already a Continental Army under the authority of George Washington of Virginia, who had come up kind of through, especially Virginia's sense of self-governance as a colony. So It was very much the declaration, like we are declaring our separation after the tussles and the complications of 1773, 74, and especially 1775. So it kind of served the purpose of both.
Yeah.
Right? The articulation of the reasons for separation, and then the call to arms to situate it in those kind of Enlightenment ideals.
And what I also found interesting is that, it was also a communications document. It in itself, they had to get people to buy into this revolutionary idea,
Sure.
this experiment in democracy. And so in many ways, the king was an audience, but it wasn't the main audience.
No,
And
no.
the other thing that I found really compelling was that they signed the Declaration. They committed their fortunes, they committed their reputation, and they committed their courage or valor, right?
Yeah,
And so for these men who were established in their communities and had means, they were serious about losing their fortune, losing their livelihoods, losing their reputation for this cause and for this purpose. And, when you look at what happened actually afterwards, many of them had to go into hiding. Some were killed. Some did lose all of their fortune, So it was a pretty significant declaration.
Absolutely. So one of the other reasons, it took some of them until mid-August actually to finally sign it. Some they had to track down, but others were like, really?
So why do we celebrate July 4th?
Oh, because, history loves a date, No, it was basically agreed to on July 2nd, but the final edits and the final concurrence and the final vote was on July 4th. And the first print newspaper was printed on July 6th. So that's how kind of quickly it starts to disseminate. Yeah.
You have a couple of objects in your collection.
I do. About 2 million, but we're going to focus on these. Yeah.
Tell us about them.
So I know that for those of you here this morning, I learned that my fellow historian and the amazing Secretary Bunch shared a little bit about the traveling desk that Jefferson himself designed, that, of course, he took with him everywhere, but, of course, also in his quarters in Philadelphia, where he was relatively well set up, including with some of the persons he had enslaved. So this desk is an exquisite piece of carpentry and design. Of course, it's Jefferson's mind, for those of you who know him as a designer and an architect. But what I love is that it can get I think our students thinking about both the putting pen to paper, of course, which is something a dying art, but they commit their thumbs to their devices and their fingers to the keyboards, but kind of that whole act and art of what that meant, and what that meant then to travel, to really think about the ways in which, I think as Lonnie said, this tiny desk, right, was this, and it folds out, and it's kind of a beautiful piece of 18th century materiality, but it's come to represent something. And Jefferson himself wrote about it. Did Lonnie say this?
No, he didn't say any of the things that you're saying.
So Jefferson says in this kind of fabulously flourishing early 19th century way that sometimes basically, things, objects can gain significance over time, and perhaps this humble desk that I designed, may have a lasting import for what it meant to the nation in July of 1776, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. But kind of amazing. So that kind of, like, history is both what happened and what is said to have happened, right? That kind of wonderful duality. And then this is one of the early, again, I said that they started to print it really quickly. In the Pennsylvania Post edition on the July 6, 1776, there's also an ad for a runaway slave to try to be captured, right? So again, that kind of instant coexistence of these paradoxes. But then they started getting fancy, and this is in 1818, just truly gorgeous reprinting of the Declaration, like with the crowning kind of glory of all the founding fathers. So you start to see that kind of heliographic work pretty soon. But I want to go into editing.
Yes,
Yeah.
because would you agree that you would say that Jefferson was the primary author, or?
He was.
Yeah.
I mean, the words, you think of Thomas Paine, Common Sense. I mean, there's been revolutionary writers, and I'll go into another one in a minute. But, Jefferson's known for his loquaciousness. Yeah. So the beautiful thing about the drafts that were written on that desk is that you can feel them like we do as teachers and as students, searching for words, right? What do the words mean? Are they sacred rights? This is the whole milieu of the rights of man, right? John Stuart Mill. What kind of rights are they? And then who are we, and how do we defend them? So you can start to see, he was an avid writer like we are, and he starts really to kind of cross out. Sacred and undeniable comes self-evident, right? Men are created equal, but they're not anymore independent, which is interesting because you think he might actually kind of reuse that word. It's a good one since what they were up to. And this whole sense of being equal in creation in the eyes of God, deriving then that power is, shortened to they're endowed by their Creator. And the inherent, he plays with this kind of whole notion of what's inherent. So I think this is just a fun set of slides. I use this often when I talk about like those choices we make. And you see someone as complicated and as important as Jefferson wrestling with that, wrestling with meaning. And I think also understanding, to your point, what the magnanimity of what they were doing. Yeah.
And I'm gonna invite. Well, you're gonna talk about this too.
Just real quickly. Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Woman from 1792, I think, is important, and we've talked about this as we've gotten ready to meet you today, especially as we're developing the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum, that here's a British woman taking the rights of man and laying down, 16 years after the Declaration of Independence, really trying to expand the philosophical debate about equality. And women are rational beings, she argues. Thus, they too have natural rights derived from that very creation in God's eyes. She said what separates women is not the core of who they are as people, it's how well or how little they're educated. So I thought it was nice for today. But the challenge she makes to everyone is the use of all men, white men, at the time, of course, propertied men. But in her vindication, she asks explicitly and implicitly, if man truly means humanity, then why are women excluded from the rights and responsibilities that define human beings?
And so even at the time, we start to see these challenges to the notion, right? And I'm going to invite Shanita in now to, maybe we'll come back.
We can come back to that.
We'll
It'll be
come
fun
back.
at the end if we have time. Yeah.
I'm going to invite Shanita in now to talk a little bit more about what this meant for both enslaved and freed blacks in America at the time.
Yeah, so thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I really do appreciate this moment with this audience, those here and online. And I want to reflect back on Anthea's words just a moment ago around humanity. That really is a key piece to how we interpret the intention of the Declaration of Independence. Man equals humanity. That's really what we think now was the meaning behind that. So pointing out also when we think about all men are created equal, being part of that preamble. And at the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, about a fifth of the population was enslaved African Americans. And so that contradiction, if you will, when man equaling humanity, but yet at the time of the signing, a fifth of the population didn't have those same freedoms, didn't have that same ideal, or at least the slave owners didn't have that same ideal for those enslaved. Many of the signers leaders of states at the time, as we know, were slave owners. So it's really a stark contrast during that time, during that reality of thinking of their own freedoms from King George, the country that funded this exploration in the first place, and still holding on to those enslaved. For us at our museum, we really point to that in this exhibition that I'll talk about in a minute, around the paradox of this moment and the paradox of liberty. And this is really, I think, the crux of what we talk about as well, with this being a living document. We're still pursuing that moment that we believe the visionaries had hoped for. And I want to also point out Jefferson himself, being the primary drafter and author of the Declaration of Independence, being a slave owner himself at that time and years to follow. He had, in the earlier draft, included language that really called into, I won't say question, but highlighted the cruelty and inhumanity of slavery at that time. Thought that that might still be included in the final version, but in fact it was excluded from the final version of the Declaration of Independence. Researchers, historians have thought that the reason behind that was to ensure support from the southern states. You mentioned this, Anthea, the risk that the leaders were taking, fueling this type of really moment, this birth of this nation, and coming up with an economy that could support this revolutionary moment. Slavery was key to that economy. So those are very difficult decisions, and sure that the thoughts were there to address the inhumane reality of slavery, but it was also factual that slavery was a primary portion that drove the economy, which was necessary to fuel this Revolutionary War and this independence. So, not to make an excuse, but that's really the reality and what really presents a contradiction in this moment. So moving on to this exhibition in our three-story history gallery at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, we invite visitors to enter this space known as Slavery and Freedom in our gallery, and they're met with this ginormous wall. It's about 50 feet high, 250 feet wide, and we include language from the Declaration of Independence, from the Constitution, and from the Bill of Rights. Each of these major documents, publications, really guiding lights for the country, have very important context that we want to make sure visitors understand as they're leaving a section focused on the transatlantic slave trade and coming into the foundation of this country. And so this, what you see here, we title this The Paradox of Liberty. There's a statue of Jefferson, there's a statue of Benjamin Banneker, and there's also a statue of Phyllis Wheatley. There are other objects that surround them. But what we try to call attention to in the design of this is how Wheatley and Banneker, prominent African Americans, both freed at one point, were actually engaging with Jefferson and Washington and a few other leaders at that time. Now, Wheatley was a poet at a very young age, the age of 13 or 14. She began to write poems. She was educated by her slave owners in Boston, and she was well recognized as an intellectual. In fact, she traveled to England, and that's where she began to gain support and funding to publish her works of poetry. She wrote often about the travels back and forth, and then her ideals and visions for this country. She also corresponded with Washington, and that was an engagement there. So when you think about this very young enslaved woman, later married, but having this moment of being recognized by others in the country, not only enslaved Africans, but many others who actually supported her work. And what she talked about specifically with Washington was encouraging the moment that he led in the war and in the fight for freedom, but also mentioning to those the contradictions of slavery and how, you know, as we all know, that needed to end at some point in some time. She also corresponded with Reverend Samson Occam, an ordained Presbyterian minister over the Mohegan tribe. So going back to Banneker, Banneker is interesting as well. He was a scientist. I believe we mostly know that. Certainly an intellectual, and actually supported Jefferson in some of his work. He authored a series of almanacs as well that gained him great recognition. He also took those moments to speak against slavery, supporting and advocating for abolition. He wrote to Jefferson specifically to encourage Jefferson to address and face those views on slavery in the country. And specifically, he wrote in response to Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia. What's interesting about that publication is in Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia, he actually addresses Wheatley and criticizes Wheatley, stating that, in fact, she wasn't as intellectual as many thought. And so it's interesting that Banneker took a moment, 6 years later, albeit, but took that moment to address Jefferson. And I believe using that relationship, in a sense, to call attention to what he could do to lead the end to slavery. So we can move on to the next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems like there was a lot of competition among the scholars because nobody liked Thomas Paine.
Right.
Like every time Thomas Paine came up, they're like, oh, I have a better idea than him. And then so it's like this jockeying for who's going to be the intellectual leader of the time. And so it's kind of like, you know, you can imagine all this is going on in this kind of way. So yeah, and so you're going to tell us a little bit more about because I think sometimes when we think about the history, there's maybe a part that gets left out about persons who were free and what their experience was in relationship to this.
Yeah. So these are two additional objects to just highlight for you today. It's a certificate of freedom, and to the next image is the tin carry-in box for that certificate of freedom. And this belonged to Joseph Trommel. In fact, he was a freed person very close to this area in Loudoun County, Virginia. Loudoun County, I believe, is about 40 miles from here. My brother used to live in Loudoun County, so it's very close to home, if you will. But to think about the need, the necessity to carry one's certificate of freedom every single day is an important recall, I think, for us at this time. And he also had to register every 2 years as a freed slave, or freedman, excuse me. So this was an ongoing process, and we highlight that as well in our collection and on display to, as you described, Monique, just to really remind others of the daily life of even freed persons in the country.
Thanks, Shanita. And so we now are starting to complicate the narrative a bit, right? We, have the ideals that are framing the revolution. We have this notion of needing to pull together but yet still be torn apart. One of the other things that I found very interesting is, like, when you think about this kind of maybe in the time period, how you do need sensing. A lot of it happened through newspapers and letters. People were writing back and forth to one another. And all of these men, the 52 men that were gathered, had a significant other.
Yeah.
What do you think those women were saying?
Well, we know in many cases. So maybe I'll talk about Abigail.
Yeah, let's talk about
Let's talk about
Abigail.
Abigail. So I think many of you probably are familiar with Abigail Adams' letter that she wrote to her husband, John Adams, over a series of days, March 31st through April 5th of 1776. It's often called the Remember the Ladies letter. So obviously a great educational resource for you. But this famous letter, he's participating in the Continental Congress, part of, articulating these important ideals that we still talk about today. And she says to him, I'm going to actually read a little bit from her letter. She says, you need to think about, well, she starts by saying, I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies, and that's capital R and capital L, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors.
Wow.
Okay, now she goes on then to have some very pointed comments about husbands and men. And I think what's fascinating when I was reading that, and then my immediate next question was, what did he say back? Right? So I went and dug
yeah,
around.
right.
Right? What did he say? Others may have more info on this, but what I found was a letter that she wrote to her friend, Mercy Otis Warren, where she talks about what John Adams' response to her was. And I'd encourage you to go and read the letter. But one of the main points that, as she was describing her husband's response to her pointed comments, was that he kind of poo-pooed it a little bit, but at the end of the day, he acknowledged that women, who are 51% of the population, by the way, and were then as well, but women are probably the most, this is a quote, most powerful discontented tribes.
Wow.
Okay? So I think even while he, in her recounting of his letter to her, kind of dismisses some of what she was saying, and he paints a picture of all the chaos that would ensue if the ladies were remembered. But he does acknowledge in that moment the power that women have and had. And I think that's, as you're thinking about how you might craft your teaching and moments for your students, I think remembering that even then, while the Declaration talked about men, women were not an invisible force. And each and every one of those men who were present during that time had women in their lives that were helping to shape the narrative, maybe not as visibly, but were certainly part of the conversation. So the other thing I just wanted to mention, factually for you all, as you think about this time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, legal status for women. At the time of the signing, women basically had very little, if any, independent legal identity. You probably know the word coverture, which is basically the notion that women's legal rights and property were really subsumed by her husband. Okay, so women's legal rights as legal identities of their own were highly limited. You couldn't, in many cases, women could not own property, sign contracts, keep money independently. And that's something to remember as we read this declaration. The second thing is, exclusion from the political sphere. There might have been some women hanging out in that venue, but I don't know what they were doing. They were definitely not talking about the ideals, or if they were, it was over in the corner quietly, and then they'd have conversations later maybe with the men that were doing this. But they couldn't vote at this time. They could not hold public office, and they certainly were not creating laws. Okay, so that's important context to help you think about. So when you talk about, in the Declaration, we talk about consent of the governed and ideas like that. It was not extended to them, to women. And then finally, I'll just mention, women obviously had a lot of political conversations amongst themselves and with men and with other women. But their public voice and the way that they were held up as strong political voices, with some exceptions that we were learning about today, was really, really limited. So let me show you one object that I think is very powerful. So this is an object that is held in the American History Museum, and it's the Declaration of the Sentiments table. So this is the actual table, kind of gives you goosebumps to think about it, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton drafted the Declaration of Sentiments. And that was in 1848. And that was right before the Seneca Falls Convention that you, I'm sure, have taught your students about. What's fascinating about the Declaration of Sentiments, besides the fact that you can literally imagine the power of this object when you think about the moment in time it symbolizes, but the Declaration of Sentiments is directly modeled on the Declaration of Independence. It's structured very similarly. It has similar language, rhetorical style. It'd be a great another primary source for you all to use in your teaching. And it really highlights the fact that liberty and equality is actually in the Declaration, not explicitly available to half the population. There's an obvious statement that you probably already know about, the statement that it begins with, which is, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." So it goes on then to talk about, similarly like the Declaration does, what grievances and concerns that are articulated by these women, and it's similarly to how in the Declaration grievances and concerns were outlined vis-a-vis King George. So super fascinating, and I would just encourage you always to be thinking about the power of the Smithsonian and other museums and cultural institutions is that in one object like this table, you can tell a million stories from all different perspectives. So
What I love about this conversation is that you can see the layering of the complication of the narrative. And we're not even fully able to touch on all of it, right? Because even as we talk about women and the disposition and the rights they had, there's a complication there when you think about white women and enslaved women and freed women. Latinos, Native Americans. We haven't even started.
Native Americans, when he equates, if I may,
Yeah.
women to a tribe, right? There's a conscious decision not to have Native peoples, even though they were allies and they had, been inspirations, especially with many of the confederations of tribes like the Iroquois, had been inspirations for many people, especially Franklin. But for Adams. In his arrogance, really, to equate women with tribes is also really, it's really poignant, I think.
Very poignant.
Yeah.
And the fact that, there's a point where Adams says, we've kind of tried to construct these ideals around independence and democracy, and now every group wants a part of it. Everybody's saying that they are part of this vision, and that's not where we're at right now. He's saying we're just trying to break free.
Don't do away with the divine right of kings.
Right,
We're
exactly.
a little busy.
Yeah. So it's a very as you can see, it's a very complex time, very complex story, and we recognize that we're not even touching on all of it. But Jorge, help us think about how do we start to intersect in the conversation around the experiences of Latinos, and in very real ways, this is a war that we shouldn't have won. So what was the influence of kind of Spain and international communities?
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you, Monique. And I love going last because, my last name, I'm always last. Don't worry about it. I'm used to it. But thank you all for being here. My wife is a 30-year educator, teacher in public schools. So to her. But I'm always intimidated by a crowd like this because she sets me straight. But, our museum, the National Museum of American Latino and the Women's History Museum, were the two last museums to be enacted by Congress in 2020 to be developed by the Smithsonian. We're tasked to build these two new museums. And in the legislation, it actually says we need to cover Latinos in the military history. And if you go onto, I know you spoke to Emily and Adriana earlier, they presented, we have a beautiful portal on our website that discusses patriots, Latino patriots. And it's so important to understand that Latinos have been a presence not only in this country for over 500 years, but they've served in every conflict that the U.S. has fought in, going back to the Revolutionary War. And it's so impressive when you start looking through that there were over 10,000 Mexicans that served in the Revolution. And you know later on, and if you're from D.C., you see Farragut West and Farragut East, and Farragut is actually a Spanish name, a Spanish immigrant that moved to the Tennessee area. And David Farragut was born there, and he's the first full admiral in the military later on. You have Bernardo de Galvez, a leader from Spain that's not only the governor of colonial Louisiana and Cuba, but later on leads some of the major battles to help with the American Revolution. So it's all these connections that we start recognizing and how important they are in our history. But going back to a question I get a lot is, what's Spain's influence and Spain's, what credit do they get to help win the American Revolution, right? And it's interesting because it's a two-sided story, two-sided coin. They are instrumental in providing arms for the colonies. They did participate in many of the battles, but it was for a reason, right? The reason they did it was because they had just lost Florida, for instance, to the British. They wanted to get Florida back. They wanted to expand. Here's this monarchy that wants to become imperialistic, and they have all these territories, but they want to make sure that maybe there is an interest in getting Louisiana. Maybe there is a possibility of getting some of that North American land back. And eventually they do. They do get Spain back, and they lose it again. Florida's gotten through 5 flags. Yeah. It's amazing. But
it's always about Florida.
Huh? It's always about Florida. I'm a Florida person, but the Florida man story is true. There is something that goes back always, and it still does to today. But it's amazing how these leaders later on get, and by the way, if you're from Galveston, Texas, that's Bernardo de Galvez. That's where the name is, the place name comes from. But these stories are integral, right, to there. But the other side of that story for the Spanish influence is what happens decades later and until today. Those people living in Venezuela and Bolivia and all these other places see that there is a possibility to gain independence. There's a possibility for freedom, and this is how you do it. So by participating in the Western Hemisphere in all these wars of freedom, they're actually planting the seed for their colonies to rise and seek independence, which I think is an incredible story there on its own, which of course is part of our heritage in the Latinos in the United States. So I always like tying it in that way.
There is a great tie, because I think to touch on that the notion of the ideals of liberty, justice, freedom, we see that, and I think you're going to share with us.
Definitely. This is one of my favorite pieces, and by the way, this just came into the collection this year, but I collected this when I was in Miami, probably about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I had an incredible story. Someone called me, a board member's friend, and says, I have this box or a bag full of letters, and I really want to sell these stamps from Cuba. You must know what they're worth. And that's the last thing a curator wants to hear, right? Like, this guy wants to sell the stuff. He doesn't want to donate. He wants to, everything's worth something. Everybody's been on eBay and thinks they have treasures to sell. So I'm talking to him, and I said, well, how many letters do you have? He goes, I have over 50 or 60 letters. These stamps are really valuable. I said, look, I don't want to break your, heart here, but these stamps are probably, not worth much. They're very common. But I said, what are the stamps attached to? Where are you getting these stamps from?
Right. So
he shows up one day. He has this literally a garbage bag, white kitchen garbage bag, and he dumps it on my desk, and all these letters spill out. Wow. And they're attached to these amazing letters from 1960 to 1962 from Cuba. And this person, his wife's mom, is receiving these letters from her sister in Cuba. And she is in prison. She's a political prisoner in Cuba. She's been arrested for protesting or possibly doing something insurrectionist to protest the new government, the communist government that had come into play in 1959. And in this letter, she's writing from her prison cell. Oh, wow. And this is the first letter here from March 1960. She's writing to her sister, and she's describing the conditions, how horrible it is, that she's locked up. Of course, there's basically any ventilation, no air conditioning back then. Food rations are very bad. Conditions are horrible. And she's describing what's happening to her and what's happening to her town and her village. This is about 32 miles east of Havana. And all the conditions. And she's saying also, have you heard of so-and-so? I think they got arrested. And the other person, they were accused also of protesting the government. So she's going through all this. And by the way, she's throwing in there, how's my nephew doing, by the way? How was his birthday party? Or how, so at the same time, she's thinking of humanity, right? She's thinking about her family. But throughout the letter, it's a hope, right? It's a pursuit of happiness. She's looking, she's staying positive. Sadly, over the next 2 years, these letters get worse and worse to the point where it's just like onion skin paper, it's on pencil, you could barely understand them. And if you can understand this, by the way, you do have that cursive power, right? The magic power to understand cursive, which all of you do, I'm sure. But when you read through these, you realize this is amazing what's being said here. And the beauty of it is eventually she does go to Puerto Rico, and eventually she's reunited with her sister in Miami years later. So they have this beautiful assembly of letters here, over 50 letters to describe this journey. And some of them are just such common things like happy birthday, this was gossip that's going on in the neighborhood. But it speaks to just one powerful small envelope and letter. And by the way, you read the envelope here, you see all the propaganda, right? Cuba sí, Yankees no. Patria o muerte, which, by the way, becomes the new slogan now for Cubans on the island, fighting for justice. So that's ironic. But it's this little time capsule that talks about U.S.-Cuba relationships. It talks about the fight for freedom, pursuit of happiness. It talks about all these different things, and it could have been thrown away. Yeah. It could have been tossed just for the value of a stamp, maybe 5 cents, 10 cents, right? So, I mean, I love bringing them. My Forum Museum donated to the American Latino Museum now, so we're really proud to have these in there.
It's I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you know, the cornerstone of the ideas of the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness are the enduring ideas. And so we start then to see over time throughout history that there are these then continuations of the right to be included in this vision. So I'm gonna bring us fast forward a little bit. I'm gonna jump some centuries and start to think about how different transformative moments in time then continue to resonate around these themes of inclusion and being part of the story and being part of the narrative. And Shanita, talk to us a little bit about Marian Anderson.
Yeah. This is a beautiful gown worn by Marian Anderson, and we'll see another piece worn by Marian Anderson as well. But it represents a artist using her voice and talents as an opera singer, and her recognition in the country in moments in the late 1930s, 1939 in fact, when she was planning to perform at an Easter concert in Washington, D.C., and the request was that she perform at Constitution Hall. And the Daughters of the American Revolution denied that request and stated that she could not perform there, she could not do the concert there. And so, in an effort to still uphold her wishes and those who were planning for her, NAACP and the State Department actually worked together to ensure that she could have a place to perform in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And we've seen these photos before. That's a moment that's really important because the Lincoln Memorial, still to this day, reserves its place as these moments of action in history and milestones, again, for that Declaration of Independence as a living document, trying to ensure that everyone has their opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. In the image next to Marian Anderson, you see Denise Graves. Some years later, in 2009, I believe it was 70 years later, so if I'm doing the math correctly, Denise Graves wears a gown that was given, the same silk gown that was given to her by Marian Anderson, right? So when I think of Marian Anderson, I mean, I thought she was beautiful when I first recognized her in my years of schooling as this beautiful woman, this beautiful Black artist, female artist, and having this moment, and then Denise Graves honoring her wearing that gown in 2009, and that's not that far. And so it just shows how close we are to history, that history lives in us each and every day. The next image is, in fact, the jacket and skirt that was worn by Anderson during that Easter performance. So for us, being able to tell pivotal, memorable stories that resemble those important moments of history is really what we try to do on a daily basis. And as educators, I think back to my years in the classroom, bring that special item from home, show and tell, all of those types of moments that really have someone tell a story through an object. And that's exactly what we try to do every day at our museum for the visitors.
And Thea, you're also leaning into this theme of life, liberty, and happiness in many different ways, right?
We are, yeah. Oh, here's another. Here's a cool one. You want to go back to Elizabeth?
Let me go here and then I'll come back. I'm sorry.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
You're driving the car, honey.
Yeah, I am driving, and it's kind of swerving.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yes.
It's the end of the day.
Yes.
So, taking the Declaration's words of life, liberty, and happiness and shifting them a bit, putting in pursuit of, and then you'll see since 2019, all of our new exhibitions have been in at least English and Spanish for accessibility reasons. But you can see our designers here have taken, we'd flashed some revolutionary questions at you, which we can go back to if we have time. But really kind of what does it mean then to imagine and then create and choose 250 objects from the National Collection and then put them all across the museum. So it's less an exhibit for next year that will open in March. In fact, and then National Museum of American Latino is also opening a new one in April. But it's almost like a museum takeover. So you'll have those 250 objects throughout, some new that have never been seen, and then highlighting them in the galleries. So this motif of this thread, how we are woven together, will go through about almost 300,000 square feet of our space. So it'll be a very dynamic experience. And then if you have the next slide, and then you'll find these objects, again, kind of connected through that thread. And here's the Jefferson desk again, inside our existing exhibitions as well. So for each of these, and I thought you guys would love this, we picked a verb. And this will all be online, and we also have a really vibrant K through 12. I can talk about that in a second. And I think my incredible Carrie Cacho is here. Hi, hon. You're amazing, and your whole team is. But so we'll have a really vibrant pre-K through 12 companion to all that we do in situ in the museum. So, of course, for the Jefferson's desk, the verb is declare. So that I hope gets people excited then about what is that pursuit, what is that relentlessness, what is that spirit then that we have. Our educational kind of portal and world into the revolutionary era and into those revolutionary questions stems from our work in the great roadmap of educating for American democracy. And I'm guessing many of you know or use it. If not, I think it's just a truly remarkable guide to help us through what does modern civic engagement in the classroom look like? Who's it for? And our work in collaboration with teachers across the country, thank you for all that you give us, and I hope we give you some in return, and some of my incredible staff here. And I think we have, I'm going to leave you with this. This, I hope, kind of ties a number of things in, which we've been discussing. Youth engagement in politics, all of your students, is nothing new. This is Betsy Buckland's sampler in which she advocates for women to support George Washington. And I'll quickly, she was a young woman in Rhode Island. She was 13, kind of, basically almost a little younger than Phyllis Wheatley. While hostile foes our coast invade, in all of the pomp war arrayed, Americans be not dismayed, nor fear the sword or gun. While innocence is all our pride, and virtue is our only guide, woman would scorn to be defied if led by Washington. So imagine, she's writing this and basically urging women to support Washington. They can't vote, but to Abigail Adams, and the must have been this incredible milieu of women free and enslaved, thinking about what this moment meant
And
And
for
is this a cross stitch?
the cross stitch.
Cross
Yeah,
stitch,
yeah,
yeah.
it's just incredibly beautiful and amazing that that it exists. It was in our Girlhood, It's Complicated show. We kind of showcased how girls have been political throughout time.
So is this kind of like the text message of our time?
Yep.
Yeah.
It just probably took about a month and a half.
Took a month and a
Yeah,
half. Okay. Yeah. And so one of the things.
And I'm sure she showed it to all her friends.
Left arm red.
Right. So one of the things that we know, and Shanita talked about this also, was the importance of economic power.
Yeah.
And I know, Elizabeth, you're doing a lot of work to really start the conversation around women's financial independence and what that means. And so talk to us a little bit about why this photo is so significant.
Sure. So to kind of tie a couple threads together, so the power of voice, the power of words, these are some of the things that we've been talking about today. And for our museum, like Jorge's museum, ours is new. We haven't built the physical museum yet on the National Mall. And we're looking forward to that. And because we don't have a physical space yet, one of the opportunities we have is to think about how can we ensure we're telling women's history using their own voices. And so we launched a project back in October called We Do Declare, Women's Voices on Independence, leading up to the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And this project is a series of about 30 to 40 oral histories that we're doing with women from across the country of all different ages in all different fields of endeavor and all kinds of lived experiences. And we're asking them a pretty fundamental question. We're asking them to reflect on, what does independence mean to you? But more specifically, what does independence mean to you through an economic or financial power lens? And the idea there is that when we think back to the Declaration of Independence and what you all already talked about, that this was also an economic statement. The same thing pertains to women back then, but also today, especially over the last 50 years. There's been a lot of things happening that we wanted to capture through oral histories and get women's voices recorded into the historical record about financial freedom. So, oral histories, which are available on our website, and the first 4 oral histories that we did focused on this question of what happened 50 years ago in October of 1974. Does anyone know? Yes, okay, Equal Credit Opportunity Act passed. Okay, that was 50 years ago. So if you have a mom or a grandma who's in their 80s or 90s, they're going to remember this moment. You can call them up and ask them. But in October of 1974, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act passed, which allowed women for the first time to access credit and capital in their own name. Prior to that, women would typically need a male relative or a husband to sign off on a credit card application or a loan for school or a loan for a car or whatever. And that notion that was only 50 years ago, and how did that come about? Now, remember, history isn't just the result of an action of one person, but through the telling of oral histories and actually speaking to individuals, you have an amazing lens to understand a larger historical context. So we interviewed 4 people at the beginning of this project, one of whom is Emily Card, who you can go on our website and check out her oral history. But she ended up being a really important catalyst for the passage of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, yet most people haven't heard of her. She worked in the senator's office that ended up putting forth the legislation that did end up passing. And she was persistent, she showed grit, she was tenacious, and she insisted and mobilized and organized and ended up convincing him that this needed to be something that was handled at the federal national level, not a state-by-state issue. Emily Card. We then went on to interview 3 women who were part of, to this picture, the establishment of women's banks. So while that law passed in 1974, and by the way, 2 years later, civil rights legislation was added to it to make sure that it wasn't just white women who would have access to credit, but also women of color, people with disabilities, and others. But during the 70s, and during this time period, there was a flourishing of an institution of women's banks, who were designed to make sure that women could actually get access to credit and capital, not just that the law had passed, but literally on the ground. And these women's banks flourished. You found them around the whole country. This is a picture from one of them. There was one here in D.C., and so some of the other oral histories you'll hear on our website are from 3 women. One woman who ran a women's bank, a second woman who received a loan from a women's bank, and another one who worked at the bank. And you can hear their stories and learn more about why and what it meant to actually lead and create an institution or an organization, in this case, a women's bank, that realized the potential of the access to credit and capital that the law represented, which I think is really a theme that we're all talking about right now. Is you have this amazing Declaration of Independence. How are we going about the realization of that?
Yes. No, thank you so much. And I think that that's such a wonderful, the oral histories themselves are going to be a wonderful tool for learning and for teaching, but also a way in which students can maybe think about how to do those things within their own communities, with their elders and with their peers.
Can I tell you a little bit about how we're trying that out?
Sure.
So today,
Yeah.
we had a fabulous panel. My team members are here who are doing the oral histories and are also developing the educational materials that go along with it. And we also have a teacher from Hockaday School, who's, I don't know if she's in the audience, but who have been trying this out.
Great.
And actually engaging their students in asking the question, what does money mean to you? What do you know about money? How are you learning about money? Who's teaching you about money or not teaching you about money? And what does financial freedom mean to you? All of those kinds of really important questions we are in the process of now that we've been piloting that, rolling those educational materials and opportunities about how to have that conversation, how to collect oral histories, how to explore what does financial independence mean for young people today.
I love that. Jorge, I'm going to come to you first since you kind of threw me under the bus going last. So I'm going to come to you first, just to give you a warning. So the summit theme is Together We Thrive, One Nation Indivisible. And as we think about going into next year, the school year, I asked this morning the secretary to think about a charge that he would give to us as educators about what we should be thinking about and what we should be doing. The secretary really framed it as this is a transformative moment to bring the country together. And he saw the Smithsonian having a specific purpose and role in that. As you think about, talking to educators here and across the nation, what would you ask us to remember as we go into this time frame of celebrating, commemorating, contemplating the 250th anniversary of the nation?
That's a great question. I think it's probably what he mentioned, that this was aspirational, right? It was striving later on with the Constitution for a more perfect union. And how do we get there? Which is only 11 years later, So I think it's keeping that in mind. I know with our museum, it's always about telling that American history narrative, but make sure it's inclusive of the Latinos and women and everyone else is also part of the larger narrative. And I think that's lost many times. I think we're facing many challenges without getting too much into politics, especially with Latinos in the United States at this moment. And we need to recognize why it's important that when I tell you we've been here for 500 years, and when I tell you that we've been serving in all these conflicts since the American Revolution, that is important. We're part of we shaped that American history narrative. And that is so key for all of you to open up and explore and give those possibilities. I know when I was in school, I didn't do that well in high school as a history student because I was being taught to remember dates and timelines and wars and battles. And when I wanted to learn was not taught at home, right? I didn't hear those stories about things my family grew up with as immigrants. But when I came to a museum, I realized later on in life that there's a different way to share history and to share these stories. And it is through the power of objects and documents and all these other resources that we provide. So you need to use those resources and then tell that story and make it, I hate to say easier, but provide another way, another method for people to digest this content. Because that's key to make those connections.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, what about you?
I think to remember, just building on what Jorge is saying, is that, history is complex, and it's an exciting moment in time to think about all of the new ways that historians and archivists and others are discovering constantly, every single day, new interpretations, new evidence that's helping us understand history in a richer way. I think one of the efforts that we're focused on right now is a discoverability lab, in which we're using AI and machine learning to, at scale and efficiently, really go through tons and tons of digital repositories and find those traces of women in American history that have, to the state, been hidden. And we can do that now at a scale and a pace that I think is going to generate such amazing opportunities for us to develop new insights that really point to the complexity and also beauty of understanding a full American history.
Shanita, what would your charge be to all of us as educators as we think about going into the semi-quincentennial?
Yeah, very similar. One good thing for us is we have an audience of students, if you will, who are very familiar and most comfortable with technology. So as Elizabeth mentioned, using AI at this time to encourage discoverability. For our museum, we have an online digital exhibition platform called the Searchable Museum, where we showcase many of our objects. The very first exhibition that was online in this platform was the Slavery and Freedom exhibition, because it's pivotal to the story. And so inviting those students to take moments either in the classroom or at home, because they always have their phone. Mm-hmm. They always have their phone. But being able to just tap into a resource at any moment and make those connections, discover what we call constellations. Jorge, you mentioned it as well. We have to make sure that learning is exciting and interesting. And same with me. It was remember the date, remember the time. The story was lost because of that. And so we have different tools now that I think really will hold their interest. And so I encourage you as educators to dive in. I know the phones are annoying, but find the way to do that.
Yeah. And Anthea, all of you are strong champions of education and the education work that we do. And collaborating with you, Anthea, I know that you're passionate about this space and try to find many inroads. So what's your charge? What are you thinking?
Well, friends speak my mind, and in terms of framing it as a charge, I think all of us have a unique and humbling superpower, whether we welcome over 2 million people a year in what in essence is the largest U.S. history classroom in the world, I'm pretty sure. It's not about size, it's about, do people see themselves reflected? Do people feel welcome? Will they find their stories? Will they be able to look into the eyes of those who they're with, their family, or maybe someone they've never met before? Will they find and locate and honor their shared humanity as is expressed in our Declaration of Independence? Will they then understand, and will you all understand, I think you all carry this within you, truly the power then of that humbling superpower that you all have as educators, right, to bring that forth. And you're facing so much, the gag orders, the limitations on what you can and can't say and can and can't teach. And I also then really encourage you, less of a charge and more of an invitation, as all my colleagues have said, to really embrace and use and take the resources that we're so honored to provide, and then help us make them better, to continue really to help us iterate. Are those classroom strategies working? This is certainly a truly remarkable time to inspect really and interrogate the Declaration and what does it mean? Why is it self-evident that we can govern ourselves? What does consent look like to be governed, and what then are our roles within it? So I think it's a wonderful, to echo the Secretary's invitation and charge, it's just an incredible opportunity I think we have to really leverage what is a once in a generation? I was a girl for the bicentennial, and you'll love this in the West, in the Spanish, Mexican, complicated Western United States. They painted a dam, because, we have to stop all the water in the West, and they painted a dam with like the Betsy Ross flag, the 76 flag, and that was kind of like it. So my parents were thrilled for the bicentennial, but for us it was like, okay, so you painted a dam, right? So I wanted to mean more. That's rich metaphorically. We can go into that later. But I wanted to mean, more to all of us, and if it does, then it'll mean more to our students and their families.
Absolutely. We have covered a lot of ground.
28 seconds left.
But I still have to close out the summit. So I didn't give myself enough time. I didn't give myself some time, but I'm going to steal a little time. But first, please join me in thanking this panel for helping us navigate this. Thank you. I'm going to have you guys go off. Yep. So thank you for sticking with us. I know that was, to me, it was a very fascinating conversation. I hope you felt the same way. I wanted to just kind of close this out, and I wanted to come back to our theme. So our theme, again, is Together We Thrive, One Nation, Indivisible. And for many of you in the room, you might have grown up in the same way that I did in the classroom, where we had to say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And I'm just going to remind us, not that you have to ascribe to this pledge, but I'm going to remind us what that Pledge of Allegiance was. It was, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I would challenge us to ask ourselves, as we go into the semi-quincentennial in this next year, where we have the privilege of working with youth and young people across the nation to really spark curiosity and wonder, that we take that charge very seriously and recognize that we are a nation that is indivisible, and that it is only indivisible because of the work that we do each and every day to preserve the Union, to preserve democracy, to commit to our civic responsibility to take it to that next step. So I invite you to join us in that journey and on that work, and to use the Smithsonian as a resource. Thank you for being here with us, and please join us for the reception that will happen across the street. I do want to remind us that we're not done. We have more stuff to do. And tomorrow we will actually, the reception is right across the street from 6 to 8. And then tomorrow we will actually provide an opportunity for you to have an in-depth experience at our museums, behind the scenes, very unique and special. But remember, don't come here. Because if you come here, nobody's going to be here. We're going to be at the museums. So these are things that you pre-registered for. Please, in your program, you have lots of information, but go to that location, and I will guarantee you that you will close out the summit on a very high note, because you will have a very unique experience in our museums. I thank you for joining us. I am a strong champion of educators. I love each and every one of you and the work that you do. And I thank you for spending your time with us.